The sun beat down on the manicured lawn of the governor's mansion, but under the shade of a towering old oak tree, Officer Dan Mercer was cool. He had been standing at his post for 3 hours, and his feet knew every inch of the grass beneath his polished black shoes. This was his 15th governor's summer garden party. He knew the rhythm of it like his own heartbeat. The soft clink of fine china, the low hum of polite conversation, the way the politicians' laughter was always a bit too loud. Dan's job today was perimeter security. It sounded important, but it mostly meant watching. Watching the guests, watching the hired staff, watching the tree line. His eyes, a pale blue that had seen too much, moved in a slow, steady sweep over the crowd. He saw the usual faces. The silver-haired senators with their deep tans. The lobbyists in their sharp suits, hands always ready to shake. The wealthy donors who seemed to glide rather than walk. And then he saw the new ones, a small cluster of young people, maybe 24, stood near the lemonade table looking like brightly colored birds that had landed in the wrong garden. University interns. The governor's office brought them in every year, a show of investing in youth. Dan's jaw tightened just a fraction. Interns meant unpredictability. They were too excited, too loud, too likely to wander somewhere they shouldn't. His gaze passed over them. A young man with glasses, looking terrified. A red-haired girl taking selfies with the flower beds. And then his eyes stopped. She was standing a little apart from the main group of interns, near a rose trellis. A black woman, maybe in her late 20s or early 30s, wearing a simple but elegant cream-colored linen dress that fell to her knees. It wasn't the dress that caught his attention, though. It was the way she held herself. She wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't giggling or looking around with wide, impressed eyes. She stood perfectly still, one hand lightly touching a pale pink rose, her gaze moving across the grand facade of the mansion itself. She was studying it, assessing it, like someone thinking about buying the place. Something about her calmness didn't sit right with Dan. In his world, people in a place like this fell into 2 categories: those who belonged, and those who didn't. Those who belonged moved with a casual, bored ownership. Those who didn't were nervous, overly polite, or trying too hard to look like they fit in. This woman, she was neither. She was just calm, observant. It felt like a 3rd category, and that made Dan's police brain itch. He watched as his server with a tray of champagne flutes approached her. She smiled, a warm, easy smile, and shook her head no, thank you. She didn't take a glass. Another tiny flag. Most people, especially newcomers, took the champagne just to have something to do with their hands. Then she began to walk. Not the wandering stroll of an intern exploring, but a deliberate, confident walk along the gravel path that skirted the edge of the lawn, moving closer to the private west wing of the mansion. The path was open to guests, but it was a quiet path. Most people stayed on the main lawn where the action was. Dan's training kicked in. Observe the anomalies. Her dress had no visible pockets. She carried no small clutch purse, no identification badge on a lanyard around her neck. The interns all had bright green badges. Where was hers? Maybe in a pocket? But the dress looked smooth. Maybe. Maybe it was tucked into a waistband? His mind, hardened by years of dealing with trespassers, pickpockets, and the occasional unwell person who tried to breach the gates, began to run through possibilities. He'd once caught a protester with a recording device sewn into the lining of a jacket. He'd found a teenager with spray paint cans hidden in the baggy folds of his hoodie. The linen of her dress was loose. It could conceal something. It was a professional thought, but it was wrapped in something darker, something Dan would never have admitted out loud. A deep, unexamined bias that whispered that a young black woman in this space, showing this much unbothered confidence, must be an interloper until proven otherwise. The fact that she was beautiful and poised only added to his suspicion in a twisted way. It felt like a performance. He made a decision. A quiet, firm, professional inquiry. That was all it would be. He would ask for her credentials. She would show them, and he would nod and let her on her way. It was his job. He adjusted his utility belt, feeling the familiar weight of his handcuffs and radio, and stepped out from the shadow of his oak tree dot as he walked toward her. The pleasant sounds of the party seemed to fade. He focused on her. She had stopped now and was looking at a historical marker plaque on the wall. Her back was to him. "Excuse me, ma'am?" She turned. Up close, she was even more striking. Her eyes were intelligent and calm. She didn't jump at his voice. "Yes, officer? Can I see your credentials, please?" Dan said, keeping his voice neutral official. The voice he used for routine checks. "My credentials?" She asked, her tone polite but slightly puzzled. "I'm a guest. All guests for this event are required to have identification or an invitation pass," Dan said, reciting the rule. It was true for the interns and staff. The VIPs, of course, were waved through on sight. "I understand," she said, that same small, patient smile on her face. "I'm afraid I don't have a physical pass on me." Dan's suspicion solidified. Every person who didn't have their pass always had an excuse. "Asterisk, I left it in my other bag. They told me I didn't need it. It must have fallen off." Asterisk, his posture stiffened. "I'm going to need to see some form of ID then. And I'll need to verify your name on the guest list." He held out his hand, not for a handshake, but in expectation. The woman's smile faded slightly, replaced by a look of mild annoyance. Not fear. Annoyance. Like he was a fly buzzing around her picnic. "Officer, my name is on the list. You're welcome to check. But I don't have my purse with me. I just stepped out for some air." Her refusal to immediately comply, her calm insistence instead of flustered apology, felt like defiance to Dan. It challenged his authority on his patch of grass. The idea that she might have something concealed in the loose skirtaphone, a small camera, something she shouldn't have flared in his mind. He needed to resolve this quickly, before she could slip away or cause a scene. He made his second catastrophic decision. It wasn't a conscious reasoned choice. It was an impulse born of habit, bias, and a desire to reassert control. "I need to ensure you're not concealing anything." "Ma'am," he said, his voice dropping lower, before she could process the words or react. He took a quick step forward. He bent his knees slightly, and with his right hand, he hooked his index finger under the soft linen hem of her cream-colored skirt at the side of her thigh. He lifted it. The fabric rose several inches, revealing her leg. It was only for 2 seconds, maybe 3. But it was an eternity. The violation was absolute, casual, and brutal in its simplicity. A young aide holding a tray of empty glasses a few feet away gasped, the sound sharp in the air. The woman, Amara, did not scream. She did not jerk away. She simply froze. The color drained from her face, then flooded back in a wave of dark fury. Her eyes, wide a moment before, locked onto his. They were no longer calm. They were deep pools of stunned, incredulous rage. Her whole body went rigid. When she spoke, her voice was a low, seething whisper, so quiet only he could hear it. Yet it seemed to shake the very ground beneath his feet. "What in God's name?" she breathed, each word dripping with ice. "Do you think you are doing?" In that moment, standing there with his fingers still touching her clothing, Officer Dan Mercer felt the first faint tremble of the earthquake he had just started. But he still had no idea just how powerful it would be. He only knew the eyes of this woman were seeing right through him, and he felt, for the first time in 15 years on the job, a chill of pure, undiluted fear. The world did not end with a bang, but with a terrible, ringing silence. It was the kind of silence that was louder than any scream. Officer Dan Mercer's hand, the one that had lifted the hem of the cream-colored skirt, hung in the air for a fraction of a second, too long before he dropped it back to his side. His finger felt like it was burning. He could still feel the soft weave of the linen against his skin, a sensation that would later haunt him. The woman, he still did not know her name, did not move. She was a statue carved from shock and fury. Her eyes were locked on his, and in them, Dan saw no fear. He saw a fire so intense it made his stomach clench. Her question hung in the air between them, sharp as broken glass. Asterisk, what in God's name do you think you are doing? Asterisk, Dan's mouth went dry. His mind, usually so quick to come up with a line of official reasoning, was completely blank. All he could think was that he had to explain, to make her understand this was procedure, that she had been acting suspiciously. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He saw the young aide with the tray, standing frozen a few feet away, his mouth a perfect O of horror. Then movement. Fast, frantic movement from across the lawn. A man in a dark, expensive-looking suit was power-walking toward them. He wasn't running, but his pace was urgent, eating up the distance with long, angry strides. Dan recognized him immediately. It was the governor's chief of staff, a man named David, who was known for his calm, unflappable demeanor. That demeanor was gone now. His face was the color of chalk. David did not look at Dan. He didn't even seem to see him. His eyes were fixed on the woman. He rushed right past the officer, placing himself almost between Dan and her. His body turned toward her in a posture of pure, frantic concern. "Amara," he said, and his voice was a strained whisper, tight with panic. "My God, are you all right?" I turned my back for 5 minutes. The name hit Dan's ear like a physical blow. Amara. It echoed in the empty vault of his mind. He had heard that name. It had been in the security briefing packet, the one he'd flipped through that morning while drinking his coffee. He remembered a line, something about a spouse, a photo. He hadn't really looked at it. Why would he? His job was the perimeter, not the principal's family. Amara Thorne, the governor's wife. She had been away for months, something about a fellowship program abroad. This was supposed to be one of her first big, informal public appearances back home. A new girl in the political scene. The information slammed into his brain, one piece after another, each one a hammer blow. He saw the chief of staff's hand hovering near the woman's, near Mrs. Thorne's arm, not quite touching her, as if she were made of something that might break. Her gaze finally tore away from Dan and moved to David. The fire in her eyes didn't go out, but it changed, mixed with something else profound. Weary betrayal. "David," she said, and her voice, though quiet, was now clear and controlled. It cut through the air. This officer, She couldn't even say it. She gestured vaguely toward her skirt, the movement small and full of disgust. David's head whipped around. Now he looked at Dan, and the look in his eyes wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something worse. It was a kind of horrified, disbelieving pity, as if Dan were a man who had just accidentally set himself on fire. Over David's shoulder, Dan saw more movement. The crowd on the lawn was parting. Conversations were dying. Heads were turning. And coming through the center of it all, with a confused smile already fading from his face, was the governor himself. He was a tall man, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone who owned every room he entered. He was laughing at something a senator had said, but his eyes were searching, drawn to the strange. Still not of people by the rose trellis, his chief of staff, his wife, and a Capitol police officer standing rigid at attention, The governor's smile vanished completely when he saw his wife's face. He knew every expression on that face, and this one pale, stone-cold, humiliated, was one he had never seen in public before. He quickened his pace. Dan felt the world shrink. The beautiful garden, the laughing guests, the soft music from the string quartet, it all melted away into a buzzing, indistinct noise. All that existed was this small circle of disaster. He could hear his own heart thudding in his ears. He wanted to speak, to explain to the chief of staff, to say the words suspicious behavior and protocol, but his throat had closed up. He saw David lean in and murmur something urgently into the governor's ear as he approached. The governor listened for just a second. His eyes flicked to Dan, then back to his wife. In that instant, Dan saw the man's public persona vanish, replaced by something raw and protective. He went directly to Amara, placing a hand gently on her back. He didn't ask questions. He just looked at her face, and his own filled with a storm of emotions. Then the governor looked at Dan. His gaze was not loud or shouting. It was measured, intense, and colder than anything Dan had ever experienced. It was the look of a man assessing a problem that needed to be removed. Immediately, he didn't address Dan. He spoke quietly to his chief of staff. "David, handle this. Now, get her inside." David nodded, his face grim. He turned to Dan, and his professional mask was back on, but it was cracked, revealing the fury beneath. "Officer, with me, now." It was not a request. Dan's legs, heavy as blocks of wood, somehow moved. He fell into step beside David, who was walking briskly toward a side entrance of the mansion, away from the staring crowd. Dan did not look back. He could feel hundreds of eyes on his back, like hot pins. He heard the murmur of the party restart, but it was a different sound now, low. Excited, scandalized buzzed out as they walked. The reality of what he had done settled over him, heavy and suffocating. He hadn't just questioned someone. He hadn't just performed a check. He had assaulted the governor's wife. He had put his hands on her, in front of people. The words criminal charge formed in his mind, clear and terrible. They entered a quiet, carpeted hallway. The sounds of the party were muffled. David opened a door to a small, plain office, probably used by the mansion's groundskeeper. He pointed inside. "Wait in here. Do not move. Do not speak to anyone. Do you understand me?" Dan could only nod. He stepped into the room. The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. He was alone. He stood in the center of the room, his uniform feeling like a ridiculous costume. He stared at his own hands, the hands that had done the thing. Outside the small window, he could see a sliver of the garden, a patch of perfect green grass and happy, oblivious people. His world, the world he knew and where he had a place, was out there. And in here, in this silent room, there was nothing but the crushing weight of what was to come. The door clicked shut, and the silence in the small, plain room was absolute. It was a dead silence, thick and heavy, pressing in on Officer Dan Mercer from all sides. He could hear the ragged sound of his own breathing, too loud in the quiet. He was standing in the middle of the room, not knowing what to do with his body. He felt too big for the space, like a bull trapped in a china shop, still trembling from the charge. He didn't sit. He just stood there, staring at the blank wall opposite him. But he wasn't seeing the wall. He was seeing her face, the shock in her eyes, freezing over into that cold, terrifying rage. He saw his own hand, moving as if it belonged to someone else, hooking under the soft fabric. The memory played in a short, brutal loop, over and over. His stomach turned, a sick, sour feeling rising in his throat. Time became strange. It felt like he stood there for an hour, but it was probably only a few minutes. He heard footsteps in the hallway outside, moving quickly. He heard low, urgent voices, but couldn't make out the words. The voices belonged to a world that was now walled off from him. He was on the wrong side of the wall. Finally, the door opened again. It wasn't the chief of staff. It was his immediate supervisor from the Capitol Police, Captain Reed. Reed was a big man, built like an old linebacker going soft in the middle. He had a kind face, usually, with laugh lines around his eyes. There was no kindness in his face now. He looked old, and he looked profoundly disappointed. It was a look Dan had seen him use on rookies who had messed up a report. It was 1,000 times worse now, directed at a 15-year veteran. Reed closed the door softly behind him. He didn't speak for a long moment. He just looked at Dan, his eyes taking in the stiff posture, the pale face, the uniform that now seemed to scream its failure. "Dan," he finally said. The single word was flat, drained of all its usual warmth. "Cap," Dan started, the word bursting out of him. "Captain, you have to let me explain." She was acting suspicious. No credentials, no badge, wandering off the main area. "I was just doing a standard check. I had a duty to." Reed held up a hand. He didn't shout. The quiet command in the gesture made Dan's mouth snap shut. "Stop talking," Reed said, his voice low. "Just stop, before you say another word that will make this even worse." He walked over to the small, battered desk in the room and leaned against it, crossing his arms. He let out a long, weary sigh, the sigh of a man who has just been handed a disaster. "Do you have any idea?" Reed asked, not really asking. "Do you have even the slightest idea who that woman is?" Dan's throat tightened. I didn't recognize her. She wasn't on my briefing sheet. I thought she was one of the new interns." Reed closed his eyes for a second, as if in pain. "Your briefing sheet?" he repeated slowly. He pushed himself off the desk, pulled a slim tablet from under his arm, and tapped the screen a few times. His movements were stiff, angry. He turned the tablet around and thrust it toward Dan. "Page 1, Dan. The principal's family. Top of the list." Dan looked. On the screen was the official guest and security memo for the day. At the very top, under a heading that said "Principal's Party," was a name, Amara Thorne, and next to it a photograph. It was her. A professional headshot, her hair slightly different, but it was her. The same intelligent eyes, the same calm expression. The caption below the photo read, * Governor's spouse. Recently returned from international fellowship. Key attendee, ... he had seen it. He had scrolled past it that morning, his brain registering only a block of text to be skimmed. His focus had been on the maps, the entry points, the list of outside VIPs. The family was always someone else's detail. He was perimeter. He was supposed to watch for threats coming in, not scrutinize the person at the very center of it all. The tablet felt like it was burning his hands. He couldn't look away from the photo. It was an official confirmation of his catastrophic, stupid error. "Now," Reed said, taking the tablet back. His voice was gravelly. "Tell me exactly what you did. Don't give me your reasons. Just the facts. What did you do?" Dan's mouth was parched. He tried to swallow. I asked for her credentials. She said she didn't have them. She said she was a guest. I thought she might be hiding something. In her dress. So you searched her?" Reed's voice was dangerously quiet. I needed to check. How did you check?" Dan felt a hot flush of shame crawl up his neck. Saying it out loud, to his captain, made it sound even more monstrous than it had felt in the moment. "I lifted the hem of her skirt. Just to see. It was only for a second." Reed stared at him. The disappointment in his eyes had hardened into something colder. "You lifted the governor's wife's skirt in the middle of the summer garden party, in front of God and everybody." He said it not as a question, but as a statement of unbelievable fact. Before Dan could form any kind of reply, Reed moved. He walked over to Don and stood directly in front of him. "Your badge," he said, holding out his hand. "And your sidearm. Now." The words were a physical blow. Dan had never been disarmed. Not once in 15 years. It was the ultimate disgrace. His hands trembled as he fumbled with the clasp on his holster, his fingers feeling thick and clumsy. He handed over the weapon, handle first. Then he unpinned the silver badge from his chest. It felt heavy, a weight he had carried with pride. He placed it in Reed's waiting palm. The captain didn't look at them. He just pocketed the badge and carefully secured the gun. "You are suspended, effective immediately. You are to leave this building right now. You will go directly home. You will speak to no one. Not the press, not your colleagues, no one. Do you understand?" Don nodded, his head buzzing. "This isn't the end of it, Dan," Reed said, his voice dropping. "This is just me, taking you off the board. The governor's office is already on the phone with the commissioner. They are not requesting an investigation. They are demanding one. And they are talking about charges. Criminal charges. Do you understand what that means?" The words criminal charges finally broke through the last of Dan's numb shock. This wasn't just about losing his job. This was about going to court. This was about a record. This was about possibly going to jail. But it was a mistake, Dan whispered, the weakness of the statement ringing in his own ears. Reed looked at him with an expression that was close to pity, but not quite. "It stopped being a mistake the second you decided to put your hands on her, Dan. That was a choice. A very, very bad choice." Reed opened the door and gestured for Dan to walk out. The hallway was empty. They walked in silence back the way they had come, but instead of going toward the gardens, Reed led him down a service corridor toward a back exit. The sounds of the party were a distant, mocking melody dot at a plain metal door. Reed stopped. "Go home," he said again, his final order. "Wait for the call from Internal Affairs. And for God's sake, get a lawyer." He pushed the door open. Bright afternoon sunlight flooded the dim corridor. Dan blinked, stepping out into a small, asphalt parking area for delivery trucks. The door swung shut behind him with a heavy, metallic clang, locking him out. He stood there, squinting in the sun. He was still in his full uniform, but without the badge and the gun, he felt naked, like an imposter. He could hear the faint sounds of the string quartet, the happy chatter of the party he was supposed to be protecting. He started the long, slow walk across the empty parking lot to where his personal car was parked, feeling every single eye that he imagined was on him from the mansion windows. The weight of what he had done, the true scale of it, settled onto his shoulders for the long walk home. The drive home was a blur of color and noise that didn't quite connect with his brain. Officer Dan Mercer. No, not an officer anymore. Just Dan kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white. Every traffic light felt like a personal trial. He was sure everyone in every passing car was staring at him, pointing at the man in the police uniform who had just committed professional suicide when he finally pulled into the driveway of his small, quiet house. The normalcy of it almost made him sick. The trimmed lawn, the bicycle his kid had left on its side, the cheerful red pot of flowers by the front door his wife had planted. It was a world that belonged to someone else, to the man he had been just 2 hours ago. That man was gone. He walked inside, the door closing with a soft click that sounded incredibly loud. The house was empty, quiet. His wife was at work, the kids at school. The silence was worse than the noise of the party. It gave the thoughts in his head all the room they needed to scream. He went straight to the bedroom and, with clumsy fingers, began to unbutton his uniform shirt. He took it off, then the pants, folding them neatly on the bed as he had done 1,000 times. But this time it felt different. This felt like he was undressing a corpse. He put on a plain t-shirt and a pair of old jeans. The ordinary clothes felt wrong, like a disguise. He sat on the edge of his bed and put his head in his hands. He tried to think it through, to find the moment where it all went wrong. He kept coming back to the same point. She looked out of place. But did she? Really? Or had he decided she looked out of place the second he saw her? A confident black woman in a sea of mostly older, mostly white power. His mind shied away from the question, but it kept coming back. Unwanted and ugly. The phone rang, making him jump. It was his personal cell, buzzing on the nightstand. He saw his wife's name on the screen. She must have heard. The news traveled fast in their circles. He stared at the phone, his heart hammering. He couldn't answer. He didn't know what to say. The ringing stopped. A minute later, a text pinged. "Call me when you can. I've heard something." He put the phone face down. He walked to the living room and turned on the local news channel. For a few minutes, there was nothing. Weather, sports, a feel-good story about a dog rescue. Then the anchor's face grew serious. "And we are following breaking news from the state capitol this afternoon," the woman said. "We are receiving reports of a serious incident at the governor's annual garden party. Details are still emerging, but sources indicate an altercation involving a Capitol police officer and a member of the governor's family. We have a crew on the way to the mansion. We will bring you more as this story develops." Dan switched off the TV. The room plunged back into silence, but now it was buzzing with the echo of those words. Asterisk, a serious incident. An altercation. Asterisk, it was real. It was already in the world, spreading. His phone buzzed again, not a call this time, but a rapid series of alerts from a news app. The headlines appeared one after another, each worse than the last. Asterisk, disturbance at governor's mansion sparks. Investigation asterisk sources. Capitol police officer suspended after clash at party asterisk. Allegation of inappropriate conduct involving first spouse asterisk. He threw the phone onto the couch as if it had bitten him. He didn't want to read the articles. He could imagine what they said, what they would soon be saying. The front door opened. His wife stood there, still in her work clothes, her face pale and her eyes wide with fear and confusion. She had clearly rushed home. "Dan?" she said, her voice trembling. "I got calls? People are saying. What is happening?" He looked at her, this woman who had been his partner for 18 years, who had worried through every late-night shift, who had proudly told their kids their dad kept people safe. He saw her fear, and he felt like the floor was giving way beneath him. How did he even start? "I messed up," he said, the words hollow. "I messed up so bad." He told her. Not the polished, professional version he had tried to give Captain Reed. He told her the ugly, simple truth. He saw a woman who he thought didn't belong. He challenged her. She didn't back down. It made him angry. And then he lifted her skirt to check, to show he was in charge. His wife listened, her hand over her mouth. When he finished, she was silent for a long time. The confusion in her eyes had been replaced by a dawning horror. "You lifted her skirt?" She whispered. "Dan." "Her skirt? Why? Why would you ever think that was okay?" "I wasn't thinking," he said, and it was the truest thing he'd said all day. "I was just doing my job." "That is not your job." She burst out, her voice sharp with pain. "Your job is to protect people, to be respectful. That woman, she's the governor's wife. For God's sake, but even if she was just some girl off the street, Dan, what were you thinking? He had no answer. He just sat there, hollowed out. Later that evening, after a silent, awful dinner they couldn't eat, the official call came. It was from a lieutenant in internal affairs. His voice was dry, impersonal. "Officer Mercer, you are ordered to appear for an interview tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. You have the right to have legal counsel present. It is strongly advised that you do so. The interview will concern allegations of battery and conduct unbecoming an officer." The word battery landed like a stone in his gut. It was a real crime. A violent crime. He called the only lawyer he knew, a guy who handled traffic tickets and wills for guys in the department. The lawyer listened quietly, then let out a low whistle. "Don, you need a different kind of lawyer. You need a criminal defense attorney. And you need to be prepared for this to get very, very ugly." The next morning, Dan put on a suit he hadn't worn since his brother's wedding and drove downtown. He met his new lawyer, a serious woman with sharp eyes, in a coffee shop a block from the public safety building. She laid it out plainly. "The case against you is simple," she said. "You touched her without her consent, in an intimate way, in public. The why doesn't matter much to the law. It's battery. They have witnesses. They have the victim, who is about as credible as they come. The governor's office wants a scalp. They are under immense pressure to show they take this seriously. What do I do?" Dan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We have two paths," the lawyer said. "We fight. We say it was a lawful search. You had reasonable suspicion. We try to pick apart the scene. It's a long shot, and it will be brutal. The press will destroy you. Or we try to mitigate. We take responsibility, early and completely. We express profound remorse. We see if we can get her, the victim, to not push for the harshest penalty. Sometimes, if the person who is hurt feels like justice has been served by an apology and a real acknowledgement, they can be merciful." Dan thought of her eyes, the ice-cold fury. He did not think there was any mercy there. "They've indicated," the lawyer said carefully, "through back channels, that a sincere, public written apology from you to Mrs. Thorne, acknowledging the specific wrong, might be looked upon favorably when considering charges. It wasn't a promise. It was a glimmer of a chance to maybe avoid a trial, to maybe avoid jail. But it meant saying, in writing, for everyone to see, exactly what he had done and that it was wrong. It meant giving up any shred of the story that he was just doing his job. It meant humiliating himself utterly. He thought of his wife's face. He thought of his kids, who would have to go to school. He thought of the uniform hanging in his closet, the career that was already ash. He looked at his lawyer. "What do I write?" The apology letter took 3 days to write. It was the hardest thing Dan had ever done. He sat at his kitchen table, a blank notepad in front of him, and the words wouldn't come. Every time he tried to write, "I am sorry," it felt weak, a lie. He wasn't just sorry he got caught. He was something else. Ashamed. That was the word. A deep, cold shame that made his skin feel too tight. His wife stayed with her sister. She said she needed space. The house was emptier than ever. The silence was a constant hum. His kids knew something was very wrong, but he couldn't look them in the eye to explain. He was a ghost in his own home. He finally started not with "I'm sorry," but with "to Mrs. Amara Thorne." He wrote that he was the officer at the garden party. He described his own actions plainly. "I approached you. I questioned you without cause. I lifted the hem of your skirt with my hand. Seeing it written down in his own messy handwriting made him feel sick. It was so ugly, so simple, so violent in its simplicity. He didn't write about protocols or suspicions. His lawyer had told him not to. Any but or because will erase the whole thing, she'd said. She doesn't want your excuses. No one does. So he didn't give any. He wrote that there was no excuse. He wrote that his actions were disrespectful, degrading, and a profound abuse of his authority. He wrote that he had violated her privacy and her dignity, and that he understood now the fear and humiliation that caused. He said he was ashamed and that he took full responsibility. He ended it with, "I apologize to you and to your family for the harm I have caused. I will accept the consequences of my actions." He signed it. It felt like signing a confession to a murder. In a way, he felt like he had murdered the person he used to be. He gave the letter to his lawyer. She read it, nodded once, a short, businesslike gesture, and said she would pass it along through the official channels. There was no guarantee it would ever reach her, or that she would read it if it did. Then he waited. The news stories had grown from whispers to a roar. His name hadn't been officially released, but it was an open secret in the department, and the press was circling, piecing it together. The narrative was set. Police officer accused of assaulting governor's wife. The words racial profiling and abuse of power were in every article. He was a symbol now, a one-man example of everything wrong with the system. He stopped reading. A week later, his lawyer called. "They've offered a deal. 1 count of misdemeanor battery. A public apology in court. 200 hours of community service, specifically with a youth outreach program focused on police-community relations. Sensitivity and bias training. No jail time. Probation for 2 years." Dan felt a dizzying rush of relief, followed immediately by a new wave of shame. He was getting off easy. He knew it. "The condition," his lawyer continued, her voice careful, "is that Mrs. Thorne has agreed to this. She has seen your letter, and she has recommended this resolution to the prosecutors." He was silent. She had read it. She had seen his shame scribbled on a page. And she had not forgiven him. That wasn't it. She had chosen a path that didn't involve destroying him completely. He didn't understand it. The court date was a blur of fluorescent lights and hushed voices. He wore the same suit. He stood before the judge, his voice low but clear as he stated his guilty plea. The judge, an older woman with a stern face, asked him if he understood the gravity of his actions. He said yes. She asked him if his plea was voluntary. He said yes. Then she gave him a chance to speak. This was the public apology. He had practiced the words, but when he looked up, he didn't see the judge. In the back of the courtroom, he saw her. Amara Thorne. She was dressed in a simple dark suit, sitting perfectly still. Her husband was not with her. She was alone, except for a single aide. She was not looking at him with anger. Her expression was calm, attentive, and utterly unreadable. She was there to witness his prepared words dried up. The speech he'd memorized felt like more lies. He looked down at his hands, then back toward her general direction, not quite meeting her eyes. "I am guilty," he said, his voice rough. "Not just of the crime. I am guilty of prejudice. I saw a person, and I decided, in seconds, that she did not belong. I used my badge not to protect, but to intimidate. I caused terrible harm to Mrs. Thorne, for no reason other than my own failure. I am sorry for the hurt I caused her, and I am sorry for the damage I have done to the public's trust. I will spend a long time trying to understand why I did what I did. Thank you." It was shorter than what his lawyer had written. It was Messier, but it was the truth. The judge accepted the plea and pronounced the sentence. It was done. As he was turning to leave, he saw Amara Thorne stand. She didn't look at him. She spoke quietly to her aide and then walked out of the courtroom, her head held high. She had come to see justice done, and she had seen it. She had no more business with him. The aftermath was a different kind of quiet. He was no longer a police officer. He lost his pension. Some of his old friends on the force wouldn't meet his eye. Others were openly hostile. He was a pariah, a warning story told to new recruits. He started his community service at a rec center in a part of the city he had only ever patrolled. The director, a tired-looking man who knew exactly who he was and what he had done, put him to work moving tables and cleaning up after basketball games. The kids, mostly teenagers, eyed him with a mix of curiosity and distrust. They'd heard the stories one afternoon. A few weeks in, he was painting over graffiti on a back wall. A couple of the older kids were hanging around, watching him. "You're that cop, right?" One of them finally asked, a tall kid with careful eyes. Dan stopped painting. He wiped his hands on his pants. "I was," he said. "Why'd you do it?" Another kid asked. There was no malice in the question. It was just a question. Dan leaned against the wall. He thought about giving a safe answer, but he was tired of safe answers. "Because I was stupid," he said, "and because I thought my uniform meant I could tell who belonged where. I was wrong." The kids were quiet for a minute. "That's whack," the first kid said, and that was the end of it. They wandered off. Wasn't a big moment. But it was real. For the first time, he had answered the question honestly, without a shield or a lawyer. It was a small thing, but it felt like a beginning. He never saw Amara Thorne again, but he followed her in the news. She didn't fade away. She started a foundation. She gave speeches about dignity, about reform, about the deep cost of casual prejudice. She spoke not with bitterness, but with a powerful clarity. She had taken the worst moment of his life and her own, and she was using it to try and build something better. She was not defined by what he had done to her. He was defined by what he had done, period. He understood, finally, the weight of what she had given him by not demanding the harshest punishment. It wasn't mercy. It was a chance to bear the weight of his own failure, and to maybe, someday, under that weight, learn to be a different man. The uniform was gone. The badge was gone. But every day, cleaning up at the rec center, facing the quiet judgment in his wife's eyes that was slowly softening, listening to those kids. He was starting a long, hard work of building something new from the wreckage. He had lifted a skirt to assert his power. Now he had no power left. All he had was the truth and the daily choice to face it.